we'll give each of the candidates perhaps about 10 minutes or so to offer an overview of themselves and their campaign, their platform, if that's an appropriate word for school committee, and then we'll just open it up for general questions and try to take turns and give everybody roughly equal time. And as you saw, Martin has just turned on the recording for the meeting. That'll be available afterwards on our YouTube channel. So I think we're in pretty good shape. I don't think I've forgotten anything. I think Henry may have been the first candidate to join. So Henry, if you'd like, you could go first.
Okay. Let me just say as we get into this, if at times I act like I'm not hearing you too well, I probably am not. So just be patient. I moved to Natick in 1988 with my wife, Linda Wilshager. We knew we wanted to start a family, and I had 5 children previously. We looked at every town between North Andover and Millis, and we selected Natick. And we selected Natick for all of the reasons that we all love Natick today. From a business standpoint, I've been involved in a lot of big companies and small companies. I've held senior executive positions. I've started 3 companies. And I think that company management perspective helps me better understand how to influence the culture of what we're dealing with a large system. And I'll come back to that in a minute. I ran for school committee for the first time in 1998, had 3 terms, finished in 2007, and spent 6.5 years on the executive board of the Advanced Math and Science Academy Charter School, which I think gives me a unique blend of school governance experience. During the period of
Henry, we lost your audio. You've gone on to mute.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't think I did it. I've been trying to mute everybody else, but I don't think
weird thing is I didn't touch anything, but all right. One of the most fun things I did during that period of time was I helped co-found Robo Natick, which is the highly regarded Natick High School robotics team. That was just loads of fun. One of the high points of that experience is that we managed with Herculean efforts to get some girls to get involved in robotics. And not only did we get a really solid team involved, they became absolute winners. And that was very satisfying. I've been involved in a lot of other town activities. Probably most recently, some of you may have heard about the Solon House project, which we have a committee that was appointed by town meeting several years ago. I happen to chair that to try and save the oldest house in Natick. One of the things that I learned a long time ago about business is that one of the most important things about the function and productivity of any group happens to be its culture. And for those of you who have had, an idle childhood and had an opportunity to read a lot of business books earlier, you probably know Peter Drucker and some of the things he's written about culture. But culture really powers an organization. And Natick Public Schools is in fact powered by a culture that is just unbelievably strong. And I'll come back to that later in a few minutes. I decided to run again in 2019 when it was pretty clear that there was an excellent chance that we would end up with Anna Nolan as superintendent. Now, why that was important to me is that I was on the school committee when Ruth Evans, principal at Wilson, hired Anna. And I think I was the chair that year. And Ruth brought Anna over and introduced her to Jerry Goldberg, who was the superintendent, and myself. And after she left, Ruth told us that she was the most talented educator that she had ever met. Even though she was obviously, that was 20-some years ago, she was a young woman then. And she said, you guys need to take care of her because she will be the best superintendent you ever had. So when it became fairly clear that we might have Anna as a superintendent, it became clear to me that we had an opportunity to do something in Natick that I had dreamed of for years. And I know it sounds, everybody says this is pretty maudlin, Henry, but it's my dream, so it can be if I want it to be. When I originally ran for the school committee, I told people that I wanted to be able to put signs up on every road leading to Natick that said home of some of America's finest schools. And over the years, Natick Public Schools evolved into a good school system and a very good school system. But we hadn't yet made the transition to a great school system. And I was convinced that with Anna at the helm and a supportive board, Natick could become a great school system that was affordable. And I felt that I had experience and insight that contributed to that. So that's why I ran in 2019. And then, of course, many of our plans and programs got sadly delayed and derailed, I guess, on March 13th. And we have managed to get most of our kids recovered, not all. And there's a great deal of work left to do. I'm sure some of that will be discussed this morning. So I'm basically running for another term to finish what I started in 2019.
Okay, thank you. That's a great overview. And I did remember a couple of other logistics. In terms of sharing information, if we could ask each of the candidates to make sure to put their website and email and whatever contact information you wish to share in the chat, and the participants as well. If you would like to share your contact information with the candidates, please put that also in the chat, and we'll share all of that after the session is done. I think that's all I needed to say. So let's move to our second candidate, Kate.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here this morning. I'm Kate Flathers, Kathleen on the ballot, Pollock, whatever name you choose to call me today. I answered all of them. I lived in Natick for 12 years. I always remember that because I was very pregnant when I moved here and my son just turned 12. I got really involved in paying attention, and I'll fully admit I didn't pay enough attention early years with my small children. It's a lot to keep up with. And when I started to get involved 2 years ago, I also started with some others, Protect Natick's Future, with really the driving goal of trying to communicate to the rest of the community that can't always pay attention. I've become a resource for a lot of friends and neighbors of, hey, what's going on? Can you explain it to me? I don't have time to spend 4 hours in a meeting. Can you give me the rundown? Started doing a lot of summaries for that. So I come into this with that same sense of service, of hoping that, if others agree that I have a voice that is generally regarded in my work and personal life as pretty moderate and balanced. My professional career is in building products. And as I say to a lot of people, I'm basically never the expert in the room. I build products for doctors and scientists, technologists, data scientists. So I'm frequently trying to get a lot of experts to agree on what's the most meaningful way to move forward and how to get value. And I like to think I do that pretty well. Lots of things I don't do as well. But I'd like to bring that to the school committee. I think that it's been a really tough year for 2 years for everyone through COVID and COVID recovery. And I see that with my own kids. I'll have kids in elementary, middle, and high school next year. I get very different messages at all those different levels from parents and students about what the needs are. And I've been listening to them, and I hope I can just be a voice for all of those constituents. In terms of things that I really want to focus on, COVID recovery is at the very top, and not just for our students, but also for our teachers. I've seen articles getting posted, not just in the Great Resignation, but even folks within Natick just being demoralized. And so whatever I can do to support the administration and hiring more teachers and finding the right teachers and retaining the best teachers through all of this, I'd really like to be a part of. I also know our kids are going to all have very different needs. And I think I want to understand what exactly we're doing to meet those needs, especially for the kids in the middle. We have very impressive special education programs and very impressive programs at the top. I mean, we see it with the metrics that often get shown in terms of AP exams and how many kids are going to Ivy League schools. But like I always say, that top 10%, they're going to thrive anywhere, and they're going to be able to be successful in almost any situation. But there's just a lot of kids in the middle that, from parents I've talked to and kids I've talked to, that especially during this COVID time are falling through the cracks a little bit. And I think that's the area I'd really like to think about and know how do we want to measure for them, kids that are making their benchmarks. So they're not of the 500 that aren't meeting benchmarks, but they're not going to an Ivy League school. Like, how do we measure their success and provide the administration in schools with all the support they need? People have watched me ask questions. I do pay attention a lot to budget. I'm an engineer. I've been a math and engineering person my whole life. I was the only woman to graduate from my electrical engineering class when I graduated, however many years ago that was. I want there to be plenty of budget. I want to support all of the programs, but I know with the potential for an operational override, that has how we spend the money needs to be clear and what we're getting for that money. And so it's not less budget, but just the clarity, because I do hear from people who have heard me talk about budget and ask me, well, why are we spending so much? And I just really want to be able to confidently say, we are spending this money so that we have the best teachers and we compensate them for the work they do, and that we can pay for these programs for these reasons. And as someone who's read every budget for the last 2 years, I don't always know that I can speak as confidently as I'd like to make that argument. And so I'd like to see how our external community facing information can be as clear as possible. And finally, I'm really invested. I really like this Natick Public Schools strategic plan, but I'd like to see a unified plan with the town. How do we come together, town and schools, on things like common shared resources, sustainability, how do things like the constituent rail trail and walkability and a thriving downtown, all come together in holistic planning that really reinforces a culture of what we are to be Natick. And I didn't tell you my personal, I think I said to a few people, I lived here in 12 years. I have 4 kids, 14, 14, 12, and 8, 3 boys and a girl. And I work in healthcare tech, building products. Currently, right now, we're building products to bring clinical trials to patients' homes so that we can broaden and diversify clinical trials and make them more equitable and be able to promote investment in rare diseases. And so that's what I do in all my other hours of my life.
All right. Thank you, Kate. Julie, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you. So thank you so much for having me here. I think the last time I was here, I had the good fortune to share information about the Kennedy project that was on the ballot. So I appreciate Pat founding this group and providing this opportunity for people to learn about things in a different way. The Zoom is great. I also enjoyed meeting in person and having the coffee there too. So thank you so much for having us back. My name is Julie McDonough. I'm running for a 3rd term on the Natick School Committee. I have 3 children in the Natick Public Schools in 9th grade, 8th grade, and 6th grade. I also served on town meeting for 10 years, since 2012. I started this journey with the Natick Public Schools 10 years ago, sitting around a kitchen table with a few of my neighbors, wondering why the class size for our kindergartners was so high. We started to do some digging and found enrollment was rising exponentially in Natick, and I started going to school committee meetings and advocating for a solution. So I was appointed in 2015 to finish the term of Ann Blanchard, and I was elected for the first time in 2016. I've served 6.5 years on the school committee, and I'm certainly proud of all that we've accomplished. Perhaps most importantly, the district's very strong and real commitment to small class sizes, which you can see when you look at the enrollments in our class sizes throughout all levels at this time. For the past 3 years, I've served as chair and have learned a lot about working in partnership with a strong superintendent and as a team with a diverse set of colleagues. Certainly the pandemic is something that none of us could have imagined, but through the dedication of our administration, our teachers, and our town leaders, we supported the students and families of Natick in profound and meaningful ways. So why seek a third term? Well, I think there's still more work to be done and more that I can contribute to the school committee. So here are my priorities if reelected. Class size. Those large kindergarten classes are just now reaching high school. I need to make sure that we maintain our commitment to small class sizes at all levels. The Johnson transition. The school committee made the difficult decision to close Johnson this past fall, and I'm committed to seeing that transition through so that the families most impacted feel supported. Support structures for staff and teachers and district-wide administration. In Natick, we run an extraordinarily lean district operational structure. This means that we ask our administrators to take on significant workloads, and we ask our teachers to take on roles outside of their job responsibilities in the classroom. We need to consider more support structures to prevent burnout from our administrators and teachers as a result of attempting to or being asked to do too many jobs at the same time. Implementing findings from our audits. Audits in the Natick Public Schools are reviews of programs that identify issues and propose solutions. Due to budgetary constraints, these identified areas of need or growth go unrealized often. 2 areas of focus that have emerged from recent audits that really should be implemented are staffing our elementary schools with certified librarians and ensuring proper supports for our students with dyslexia. Finally, providing competitive compensation to our teachers and staff. Natick consistently ranks in the lower half of the state for teacher pay, and the situation is worse for our most experienced teachers. We must fix this. The contract we are negotiating now must address the disparity we see between what we pay our experienced teachers and what other districts pay. We really can't afford to lose them now. So that is my brief overview. So I look forward to your questions and the conversation.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for going well under 10 minutes and reserving lots of time for questions. And so I hope there are lots of questions. Elaine, I see you have your hand up, and that's the one other logistic I meant to ask. It helps me anyway, if you use the raise hand function to have a question, just because it puts you in the upper left of my gallery. So Elaine, would you like to lead us off? Oh, you're on mute.
You're
at the
muted,
moment.
Elaine.
Elaine, you're on mute. Still on mute. Oh, there we go. All right. No, you're still on
she's
mute.
Still on mute.
Well, who else has a question while Elaine figures how to get herself off mute? Marissa.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. Thank you to all of the candidates and to this and to the organizers for this. This is awesome. I wanted to ask a question to the incumbents. I'm interested to hear, as I'm a parent of 2 kids, one in middle school and one in elementary school. And, you know, we've been through it the last couple of years. And I'm interested to know what what Henry and Julie consider to be their top 3 achievements over the past couple couple of years. I think both of them sort of alluded to it in their opening remarks, but I'd be interested to hear sort of the specifics.
Thank you. Henry, you want to go first? Or-
Sure. I think far and away, the absolute top level accomplishment was that we were able to keep our kids and our families safe. And that's something that I think just transcends everything else. During that period of time, I was a strong advocate for measurement. And I helped support the administration's implementation of a variety of tools surrounding the Renaissance software package that gives us the capability to evaluate not just where kids are, but where they have the capability to be. And that's really important as we look forward to the future. I think the third thing that I would count as an accomplishment is that I think that we have been able to establish in Natick Public Schools a culture that is powered by excellence. I think the whole concept of moving Natick to one of the best school systems anywhere that's still affordable for the people is now pretty deeply embedded in the culture of what makes this district run. And I think that I can take some credit for that. Certainly not all, but some. I think I've helped my colleagues be more effective on some decisions. And I think that I've helped the superintendent move ahead to be, I guess, a leading edge light in a lot of areas that other superintendents around the state are kind of fearful of treading.
Thank you. Julie?
So I did allude to one of the things that I think I've been able to accomplish, which is over the past several years, and certainly since my term, is the class size. I do think when I started this, it not only was Natick experiencing significant student enrollment growth, but there really wasn't a commitment to smaller class sizes. I had many meetings where it was just okay that kindergarten and first grade classes were at 25 or 26. And the solution was, oh, if we add in like a support person for first grade when it hits 26, that's our solution. And then the argument against doing this was, well, we just don't have the space. And there was just no movement on figuring out what we were going to do. And it just, I mean, if you talk to any of the teachers, 25 kids or 26 kids in a kindergarten class is just not, it's not manageable. And I will say also, as I've watched the kids go through, and now we have a superintendent who is committed to this, and we have the community advocating for this, that we've been able to bring class sizes down. We've added teams as these groups have moved through the grades. We've added teams at the middle school. And I'm really pleased to see that we were able to use some grant funding at the high school level to bring the class size down there this year, which we've heard like from our English department that has made a huge difference in the feedback that they're able to provide to students. And it was particularly important this year to be able to really connect with students and make sure that every student was known and that they could get the feedback they need as they seek to recover from sort of an uneven, despite keeping the kids in school, it was definitely an uneven year with hybrid learning. So I would say that. Then the second is just working for the past 3 years as chair, and of course the past 2 years in the pandemic, working closely with the town administration. It was very difficult in the pandemic working through that, but daily meetings with town administration, daily meetings with the health department to make sure that we were going to find a way to keep to reopen our schools, but also that we were going to have the budget to be able to do so. And so, of course, the changes at the and being the advocate for the schools that we needed to be, and asking the select board for their help when we really needed their help to make sure that we didn't have to make some really drastic cuts that would undermine much of what we had decided what we wanted to do with the schools during that time. And then I would say this year, supporting the superintendent in quickly deploying a lot of supports for students as they return to school full time this year, both academically, and, which I talked a little bit about at the high school, but also the social emotional supports for students, and additional guidance counselors, using grant funding to get those people in place immediately, knowing that there were going to be significant needs for students as they return to school.
Thank you. And before we go to the next question, which will be Pat, just for the sake of equal time, if I can flip the question a little bit for Kate, over the last couple of years, have you seen anything that maybe, gosh, if I were on the committee, I would have done this, or, any missed opportunities?
I think Julie has really highlighted, things that I agree with that have been great progress. And Julie, I've really appreciated your leadership throughout this. I think it's mainly that in some of with the supports we're deploying this year, we have to throw everything at kids. I know that there have been approvals for more WIN blocks, for getting what I need and more response intervention. I know we've talked about deploying more math specialists, and there's been a lot of grant funding to do all of that. One thing that I'd like to see is a little bit more clarity, maybe to me, and maybe it exists in dashboards that I haven't really accessed or not clear, or it's been discussed, is more metrics about which of those work. Like, I know we're going to run out of grant funding, at some point, and then we're going to have to make a decision what programs we continue to fund versus ones that we can't potentially afford to continue to fund. And as we roll out some new programs like deploying math specialists, or what do we think we're going to get out of those, and what are the metrics we drive by? I know, Henry, you've talked a lot about metrics. When I look through the strategic plan, I can't find them, and maybe that's a public communication challenge, or maybe there's work that still needs to be done there. I think dyslexia is a good example. As I go through, I'm really I have many dyslexic children. I'm really encouraged by wanting to look at Orton Gillingham, wanting to do additional training, but I haven't seen necessarily what are the exact metrics to know that we've screened the kids early. How do we know that we're actually hitting kind of the numbers of identified students are reflective of the prevalence of dyslexia in the population? So I think some of those could be clearer, and I think would also take pressure off of the administration. I am not coming in at any kind of educational expert, and I know this has been an extremely taxing time for the administration, and I want them to have as much time as they need to actually do the work and the implementation. So I think some of the clearer communication and maybe even more metrics would just be good for keeping the communication streamlined.
Thank you. Pat, I think you are next in queue.
Yeah, thank you. I want to say I'm quite impressed with the leadership in the public schools, and especially in the last 2 or 3 years with the pandemic crisis. I know that was a tough period. My question is kind of through Julie, but I'd like to hear what other candidates have to say about it. The modest faculty or teacher salary structure seems to be kind of an important issue, because I can just talk from my own experience. I was a teacher for 40 years myself, and the last 25 in Wayland public schools. And Wayland paid very good teacher salaries. And I think that's where you get the talent. And I think the market out there, I'd be interested, I haven't read the strategic plan, but how are we going to recruit our very best teachers? And how are we going to start recruiting a diverse faculty? And I think without pretty good compensation, I just don't see how that will work. And so my question is, you know, that must be in the strategic plan somewhere. I just haven't read it, but I'd like to know what the three candidates think about that.
Great. Well, we start with Julie as you requested.
So your last point is a good one, Pat, because I was going to say not only is it requesting the best or recruiting the best teachers, but it's recruiting a diverse workforce. And that is in the strategic plan. And the superintendent has been able to take advantage of some of the programs offered by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in training our own diverse faculty that are currently employed by the Natick Public Schools and providing resources to them and training, but also to figuring out different ways to recruit that are not the ways that we have done it before, non-traditional ways, accessing different organizations, different types of groups to diversify the workforce, because that helps our culture as a whole to build this inclusive culture where we not only we have students that are feel welcome and included in the school community, and then we have staff who reflect those students, because we do have a very diverse student body, and we want that reflected in our teachers and staff as well. So that is something that they are working on. It is very difficult, right? We have to support the trainings for the current staff, and we have to support the outreach to recruit that staff, to recruit new diverse staff. With regard to the teacher pay, it is something that we've been working on. And I've only been involved for 6.5 years, but for 9 years, there has been an effort to address the teacher pay in Natick, and we look at surrounding towns, and we see it, you know, in this actually mathematical formula that we've been created that we are below. So we have started to we've addressed incoming pay. Now the piece of the puzzle that we need to address is keeping our teachers with the more experience, because if you look across at our comparative districts for DESE, and you look at our the surrounding towns, because of course we compete with those, because it's it's about location too. You see that we underpay, and it's documented, right? That we know that we do this. So we have to find ways to increase that, to encourage people to stay, and to find and to work with the unions to figure out what is it that will keep our most experienced teachers here right now, especially right now when it can be very attractive to retire because it's been so stressful. And you do see people retiring earlier than you thought they were going to. So how we do that is, that's a compensation piece. So we have to work with the town too, and explaining what we're trying to do, and collaborate with them. Because that is, and with the Natick taxpayers too, because they need to understand where we are and what we're trying to do.
Okay. Henry, do you want to add to that, or? Currently on mute, Henry, but, possibly you didn't hear me. Henry, if you want to.
Couple things. 59% of our teacher workforce is at their top step. So that means that they're highly experienced, they're highly trained. And what we can't measure quite as much is that because of the reputation that Natick enjoys in Massachusetts, other superintendents are lustful over recruiting people that have been trained in Natick. whether that be teachers, that be principals, or other administrators. It would be a crying shame if we end up losing a significant portion of our most experienced staff because we didn't do anything to try and keep them around. As a point in fact, there's a lot of effort on it right now, and Julie pointed on this, to try and come up with solutions that will help us retain and grow our most skilled and most tenured teachers. They're the heart of what drives the system. They're the heart of what powers the culture of the system.
Okay, thank you. Kate, do you want to add perspective?
Sure. Sure. On my perspective, I haven't been, I haven't been involved. I'm not on school committee. I haven't been privy to the union negotiations. I would love to see, and perhaps this all exists as part, and Julie, you alluded that you are talking to the union leaders and finding out what the teachers need. I mean, I always go back to, what do the teachers need to stay, which is compensation is going to be a huge part of it. And I would always go to bat for more budget for equitable pay across the board. As a woman in tech, I've had to, fight for equity, equitable pay many times for many people on my team. So but on the hiring diversity one, I really wouldn't presume to overstep onto the administration there. I think in the strategic plan, setting goals for more diverse hiring. I've done diversity hiring in tech. It's not easy. I've had to put mandates that says, we can't hire for a position unless we've seen, at least 3 resumes from, non-traditional gender, race applicants, and really held that line. And that's could be a really hard line to draw. But I think the experts are the administration. They're the experts. They would know the best practices. They understand what it's like to be professionals. I work with a lot of healthcare workers right now. And as they always say, we know best of how to hire and recruit other healthcare professionals in this climate. We can relate. And I think that's probably true in this case too. So here, as part of the school committee, I think the most important thing is to be supportive of the administration, to set goals for, we want our teachers to be retained. So let's set goals around retaining. We have a hiring diversity. Let's set goals around that. And then tell us what you need to make that successful and let them do their job.
Thank you. Before we go to Carrie, who's got his hand up, I just wanted to circle back to Elaine since she's unmuted. Elaine, had you been trying to ask a question earlier?
Well, I'm sort of wondering about the dealing with students with exceptional needs. How is this being handled?
Kate, why don't we start with well, actually, that might be a tough question as a challenger, but you could say, what do you see as the need there?
I guess it's what exceptional needs can mean a lot of different things.
Sure.
Exceptional needs can be, profound needs from alternative learning situations, but exceptional needs can also mean, kids that are in the middle, they
Right.
have some very specific needs and those don't get met and they fall through the cracks. I think we've had a very overtaxed 2 years, and there's a lot of needs that it's very hard for me to speak on this as a challenger, but I think it's very hard to speak in general because I haven't seen survey data that's well-designed and comprehensive on this. And it would be very easy for me to slide into anecdotes, as a special ed parent myself, multi times over. I'm in all the forums and all the channels, and I hear all the heartbreak and the horror stories. And I don't think it's fair to lean into any of those anecdotes of folks who don't feel like their kids or needs are being met, because I know that the squeaky wheel often is the one that gets, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so that's may not be a fair representation. So what I'd like to see and uncover is working closely with, with CPAC and with Mr. Luff, is how can we get a good picture about what's going on out there? Because I don't have a good picture that is fair.
Thank you. Henry, do you want to add anything on that topic?
Yeah, I would say that I think we may have an incomplete picture, but I think what we do know is very clear. We have a variety of different assessment tools, plus the observations of our teachers. We have right now, I think, 826 kids on IEPs. That is an all-time high. In addition, we know that we have approximately 500 kids who have a learning deficiency that we have to make up. Now, some of those kids are on IEPs, some are not. And in addition to that, we know that we have a lot of kids that came out of the pandemic with significant emotional and psychological challenges. And we are putting a huge amount of resource into trying to help those kids develop the skills and the resiliency and the ability to work through some of the anxieties that they're feeling. So I guess my feeling is, yes, we have a lot of kids that need a lot of help. And the thing that I am fearful of is that some of these kids are going to end up with a very diminished future because of things that we, the adults that are responsible for them, fail to do. And we can't allow that to happen. We have to make sure that we take care of all of these kids.
Thank you. Julie, do you want to provide your perspective?
Yeah, I would say, I think Kate brings up a good point about not operating in anecdotes and using data to understand where our kids are and what supports they need. One of the things that I thought was helpful last year was when in the audit that we did a couple of years ago, a literacy audit and identification of deficiencies in supports for dyslexic students. There was then listening sessions with families to better understand what was happening, follow up with individual families, looking at our literacy data, and then providing those, figuring out what we can do as a system to provide those supports evenly and early so that kids get the help that they need. So I think that's one example. I think there is a strong effort in the Natick Public Schools to provide programs that allow students to continue to go to school in Natick, even if they have exceptional or extraordinary needs. And Mr. Leff talks a lot about allowing students, building the programs that we need in the schools that then allow students to go to school in Natick with their neighbors and their friends and their peers. And so I think that's another important piece to providing students with needs, the needs in our district, and continuing to support those programs from a budgetary perspective.
Thank you. Carrie, you're up next.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks to the three of you for sharing all that you have. I just want a little backdrop. While I was still living in Brighton, I was running a temp agency in Watertown while helping get curbside recycling going in Boston, and was on the grand jury there. It was a busy time, but with the Boston Recycling Coalition, I had a chance to go into a classroom with some students, and really got thrilled with the idea of standing in front of a group of students and teaching them. And as a result, I ended up enrolling and getting a degree from Lesley College in environmental education. Did a independent study project there and put together a 14-week unit, and had this idea of being the adjunct teacher, if you will, to teach, the classroom, a unit in, say, recycling, energy conservation. Another school one day, whatever. That didn't come to fruition, but I ended up being an educator anyway when I teamed up with Newman's Own Organics and had a fundraiser that benefited schools all across the country. And even though I wasn't in the classroom, I did reach out to a lot of students on a broad basis through the education material. Anyway, moved to Natick in 2003 when I bought a two-family house here. And ironically, today, one of my tenants now has a student at Johnson, and her son has really excelled since moving here and going to school in September. And with the idea that Johnson's going to be closing, all I've ever heard was just they had such a, students just seem to excel in that classroom model. I'm wondering what it is that Johnson has that really allows students to excel there so well, and can that model be transferred to other elementary schools here in town?
Is that directed for all three
All
candidates?
three of us, I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah, sure, okay. Julie, why don't we circle back to you first?
So that's an interesting question. And I didn't know anything about your environmental education background, so I thought your question was going in the mode of sustainability in the schools, which I'm very excited about to really get into and to try to strengthen that piece of what's happening in our schools. But I'll go in the direction of Johnson now. So Johnson, we know, having had discussions about Johnson for many years, and we know that the smallness of the school really creates, and I know Kate will speak about this because she is a Johnson family, but and I'm not, but my understanding is that it creates a very strong community bond because it's so small. There's fewer number of teachers in each grade. There's fewer number of students. I think kids know each other across the grades. They have some outstanding programs that like the Johnson Peacemakers, which has been amazingly successful. And so I think, from a data perspective, I think that Johnson students perform similarly to students across all of our elementary schools. So if we look at it from an academic perspective, I think we are able to deploy the academic programs in a way that all students do well in all of our elementary schools. But I think the small nature of Johnson creates a different kind of community, whereas all of our other elementary schools in Natick are between about 350 to 450, 500 students. So it's just a different type of community and bigger neighborhoods. And so I think with the decision to close Johnson, there were many reasons for that decision that were discussed extensively in the fall. And we did have, I do think, I lost my train of thought. When we, as a school committee, we looked at the cost of the building, and we looked at our other elementary schools and the deployment of resources to those schools and what the town needs were and what the town financial limitations were. And so all of those things came into play when we made that decision. I do feel confident that the plan to transition Johnson takes into consideration the how difficult that will be. So there has been an advisory council formed of led by Johnson families, and they are working with the other community groups in the other schools, and there's plans to keep those students together as they move to the other schools so that they are not feeling like they're entering a school where they don't know anyone. So the 3-year transition allows us to do that. But I think there's no doubt it's very difficult and hard for those families. So that is one of the things I want to be able to see through as a school committee member. And I'm one of the school committee members on that family council, attending those meetings and whatever direction they choose, the parents choose from there.
Why don't we go to Kate next, particularly since you've got the perspective as a Johnson parent.
There are great
And
things
if-
about, oh,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead, Doug.
Oh, I was just gonna maybe restate or repeat what I thought was the essence of Carrie's question, was that if there are things that folks feel are unique about the Johnson environment that led to success, are there elements of that will be, can be, should be replicated at the other schools? But I think that was the gist of what he was saying, but
Yeah, Yeah, my 10th son was floundering in another school system, came here and just excelled. He's gotten involved in all kinds of different activities and such, which he hadn't had before. And you know, what Julie was saying about the smaller classrooms and just the whole community feel certainly makes a lot of sense. But even, I'm just wondering, even moving to a larger school, certainly in a larger section of town, it seems like you could replicate that small classroom feel.
Thank you. So Kate?
I've heard great things about all of our elementary schools. I mean, my kids in middle school go to school. I mean, I think culture things are great at all elementary schools. I love Johnson. I mean, don't get me wrong, all my kids have come through it. It's part of my community. But I don't think it's uniquely special. But a few things that I do think are really important to take away from this process is, and some of what I think there was resistance in the Johnson community, you know, at the time of the vote is, I think we need a plan for elementary education. In terms of where we want to end up. So I can get behind an argument that a 250 person elementary school is unsustainable financially for trying to balance resources. But it's not clear to me if we want to move towards, 500 plus elementary schools, or try to keep them at, a sweet spot of like 350 to 400 and try to balance them that way. And so that makes me nervous because I don't feel great about the trying to drive towards the really big schools, but I can see there being a right size. I'm not an education expert. This is just kind of things I've heard or read, and I'd like to have that vision clear. I also, as we do that planning for schools and where we want to end up, to go, Carrie, I guess back a little bit towards that sustainability. This is an area where I would like to be in lockstep with the town in terms of planning. The farthest school that my kids will go to, because we're walking distance to high school in Johnson, is Kennedy. And they still bike the couple of miles to Kennedy when the weather's nice, but it's not a great bike ride. So, how can we work to try to make walkability, bikeability, encourage our kids to get out there, and make our kind of school facility planning take that into account as much as possible. Because, we are facing, the screen addiction crisis, obesity crises, it's trying to get kids out. And so something that I think much more than the small size of the school, I think the biggest part of what Johnson had going for it is that most families walk their kids to school. So that I parented every kid in this neighborhood, because if I happen to be up there and another parent wasn't, you just arbitrate it from, kindergarten on, so whatever we can do, partnering schools and towns to give neighborhoods as much support as possible, all the neighborhoods. I mean, Julie, I know you live in my kid did Halloween with your kid in your neighborhood. Like, there's a lot of really strong neighborhoods. And I'd like to see really our schools working to make that neighborhood feel as strong and as long as possible for the kids.
All right, just throw in a quick follow-up question, since two of you talked about sustainability. I was on the sustainability committee, and I forgot when I was doing my student teaching with Wayland, ironically, Pat Conway was there, although our paths never crossed. But I know Bill Ramage, I'm probably asking a question for him, but he's often brought up the whole idea of getting electrified school buses here. Any thoughts on how you might be able to help facilitate that? That might be more of a question for, Anna Nolan, but
Yeah, before we spend too much time on that, I'd like to give Henry a chance to weigh in on Johnson small schools, and we also have Lisa and Sarah also have questions as well. So Henry, your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are colored by the fact that I was a Wilja parent of a kindergartner in 1995 when Wilja was scheduled to close for a year while it underwent a significant renovation. And following that renovation, the size was going to be doubled by pulling about 200 kids from Memorial into Wilja. And I have to tell you, there was incredible anxiety in the Wilja community about that, for all of the same reasons that people, I think, are legitimately concerned about the Johnson environment. Now, as Julie said, academically, the Johnson kids perform about the same as all the other kids in Natick. This is actually the first time in several years that all of the elementary schools' academic performance was pretty level. Everybody's doing a great job. That, of course, took a lot of effort. But there is no question that a lot of people are going to be really concerned about the change in the community. What we discovered when we went to the enlarged Lilja and we brought in all the memorial kids is that there was still a strong sense of community, but it was a bit different. It tended to be more grade level focused. It tended to involve more kids and parents in that community. And particularly as you get into the 3rd and 4th grade, where kids are doing a lot more in the way of external activities in terms of sports, music, and so forth. There's a lot more things to occupy them and to create community. The Lilja environment also did a lot of things in terms of activities that were specifically targeted at fostering community. I think those things have to continue. I think that the decision that the administration has made to put a guidance counselor in each school that's got Johnson kids to pay extra attention to how those kids and those families are doing and to try and do everything they can to make sure that those kids are integrated into the community in the most positive way. Ultimately, of course, all the kids leave their elementary school environment and move off to one of the 2 middle schools. And what a lot of people don't really understand is that the middle schools are really run like 2 schools. I mean, Kennedy has a different 6th grade environment that is different from the 7th and 8th grade environment, and to a large extent, Wilson does the same thing. And that helps build community for kids in that age group. And then, of course, somehow when they get to high school, they're pretty much on their own. I had this explained by a guidance counselor one day who said, you know, Henry, people just really get panicked about sending their 4th graders off to these big middle schools. And he said they really shouldn't worry about it because the kids do just fine. By the time it gets for them to go to high school, they just drop them off at the bus, or drop them off on West Street, and that's it. And that's when the kids need the most support. And that's kind of an interesting view from somebody who I knew for years who was a guidance counselor. I think that's kind of consistent with what we saw happen as a result of the pandemic. This is a quick segue. The kids that took the ACT, SAT, and all the AP tests last May and June ended up scoring at or above levels that were scored before the pandemic. And that basically says that an awful lot of our kids came through the pandemic in academically pretty good shape. But I think what our educators would tell you is that there's a lot of kids in that population that have got a desperate need for more emotional support and psychological support. And to me, at least, it was kind of surprising to see that this concentration of emotional needs was in the middle school and high school level, as opposed to the little kids. Little kids seem to be doing, by and large, pretty well. But it's the 7th grade, 8th graders, and the 9th and 10th graders that are having a lot of challenges. And those are challenges that we have to deal with, as I've said before.
Thank you, Henry. So I just want to be mindful of the time. We are at the top of the hour, and we could certainly go past 10, but people have only so much time. So we've got a question from Lisa. Sarah.
I don't have to ask my
Sarah
question.
doesn't have to ask her question.
I would love an answer, but
yeah,
I
no,
will
we could
forego.
probably squeeze it in, but then I also want to give each candidate just one final time to offer any closing remarks. So just wanted to do a time checkpoint. So with that, Lisa, you've been very patient. What is your question?
First of all, I just want to apologize. My camera is not working, or you would see my face instead of my family. I guess my question is, well, actually not guess. My question is about a communication. There's been a lot of talk in this campaign about communication. As a former school committee chair, I understand the difficulties, the intricacies of communication within purview, within educational law. but I will say I didn't have to deal really with the difficulties of social media, which I think plays into this. So I wanted to know from the two incumbents, what do they think is really the most difficult, I guess the difficult issue regarding communication and social media? And could they please explain the role that SC, a school committee, has regarding communication? Because I know there's some norms. And I don't want to leave you out, Kate, but I wanted to know what you think as someone coming onto school committee. How what do you feel is an issue with communication? How would you want to solve it? Being mindful of the role that a school committee member has, the purview, the norms, and all of that.
Thank you. Henry, you want to go first this time?
Yeah, it's going to take the rest of the week to answer that one.
Well, be mindful, we're past 10.
The communication actually comes in several forms. We have, the district does, I think, an exceptional job of communicating everything that's relevant to what the district is doing, why, what the plans are, and so forth. And I won't spend a lot of time on that. The challenges are associated with trying to communicate what are the issues that the school committee is wrestling with, and what are the factors that will influence their decision. And this gets complicated because a lot of people really don't understand that the school committee is not responsible for managing the district on a day-to-day basis. We're responsible, among other things, for policy, budget, and hiring the superintendent. But what we deal with is to help the superintendent implement or approve policies, procedures, programs, processes. And of the 7 of us on the school committee, we have no authority as individuals to do anything. Nothing. We can't. The only people that can comment and speak for the school committee are the chair and the vice chair. And typically the chair and the vice chair are very, very careful about deigning to be able to speak for the school committee. The only time the school committee can speak for the school committee is when they're meeting together as a group. And I think that the challenge there is that without violating open meeting laws, we cannot talk about outside of that group anything that we're going to be voting on. And that's a challenge, particularly sometimes when it might be a controversial employee relations issue, which the school committee is absolutely not involved in. And I've often thought that maybe what we ought to do is have a social media page devoted to the Natick School Committee where the chair and the vice chair can put together summary discussions of what we did, what we will do next, and to describe some of the constraints that may affect a particular decision. I think there's a way that we could do something like that that would be productive for the community and probably productive for included in that community are teachers and staff who probably are just as mystified by what we're doing sometimes as the rest of the community. So I'd like to see something like that explored.
Thank you. Julie, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, this is like, I should be able to answer this question because this is what I do. I do communications for a school district, but it's incredibly complicated. To address the social media piece, social media is really challenging. It's hard to communicate complex ideas that have multiple inputs on a social media group or chat. It seems like whenever you do that, the conversation goes in a different direction. So I don't think it's the best place for school committee to be communicating what it's doing. And I found that particularly true when we were in the fall with discussing the Johnson decision and then the ultimate transition. It was really complicated. The other problem with social media is that the algorithms are such that if you try to use that as your communications tool, you may or may not reach people based on how their feed is coming through, or the day in which they check it. I've attempted sometimes to go back and find information, and I can't find the post, or I can't find what happened. So one of the things that so in terms of social media, we do as a committee try to have the chair respond factually to any questions that come up on social media. But in terms of a proactive piece, I'm not sure it's the best way to do it. I do think that we can do better with communications. I think that is always something that we strive for. It is very difficult as a committee, as Henry mentioned, to communicate, because we cannot collaborate on a document or a statement or anything we want to communicate unless we are all together in a public meeting. So we do have ways in which we can, we have a subgroup that's not a quorum that we can come up with something that we might want to communicate, but that's challenging because that can only happen in this subgroup, which is 3 of the 7 people. One of the things that came up, and I think one of our newer members has had this idea of like a newsletter or coffee hours, and we've kind of launched these coffee hours. The coffee hours were interesting the other day because it was about communications, and Donna's on the call with me, and I see that, and we were there together. And so one of the ideas that came, which I think is a great idea, was to use the school committee page on the Natick Public Schools website as a place where we could put information that's more easily accessible than where our agenda items are posted, and where it's harder to search. And one of the things that I suggested in the fall with Johnson was we needed a Johnson webpage. We needed some place where all of the studies and all of the documents that we were producing could be accessed. And that way, and it was linked right from the homepage, and that way everyone could access that information in one spot versus trying to go back. So I thought that was I think it was a pretty successful way for people to refer to the information that we were discussing in our meeting. So I do think there's always room for improvement. And we continue to work around the open meeting, not around it. We continue to work with the open meeting law, but trying to find ways to get information to people that's easy for them to find, really, and read if they want.
Thank you, Julie. Kate, you want to add your perspective as a potential new member?
I'd like to check in with Lisa to find out if we're answering the question, because I'm struggling. Communication's hard. There are restrictions with open meeting. There's contention between what is communication that's from the administration to the school committee for consideration versus content that the school committee would produce for other reasons. I think social media is an awful place to try to debate any of this, and would encourage not using it even as much as it's used at times. But Lisa, what was there something specific you were trying to get out of your question?
Well, I guess, there's been a lot of talk of improving communications. And I guess for me, what I see is one of the issues is social media and the role that social media has been playing, that people are using it as a way to get information across. And then I think I guess I'm trying to mesh, how do you deal with that? The people believing what they read in social media is fact, with the constraints of being a school committee member, because people don't understand, I think, the role that a school committee member has regarding to communication. So I guess my question for you, Kate, as someone who's been a great communicator on Facebook with PNF, and how would you, what do you see would be an issue? What do you see are the issues, and how would you come on as a school committee member? And let me just back up. What do you see are the issues of communication, and how would you change it? Because that has been a theme, I think, between the two challengers of this committee. So
That's fair. Yeah, so to that end, I mean, I guess it's something that I think of myself a lot, and just to take it as kind of a little bit of a personal anecdote is my husband and I think and process information very differently. And after years of marriage, I've actually become much better at my job, and my kids actually think and process information very differently from me as well. And it's actually been hugely beneficial in my job, living day in and day out with someone that processes differently. I mentioned I have kids with dyslexia, and and I've actually realized I've spent a lot more time in the last decade in my position as I try to figure out how do I organize a meeting or how do I communicate, is thinking about other ways people process information and how I can make my communications more inclusive, if you will, towards someone who might not be thinking or exactly like I am. And so I guess there's a lot of volume of communication that comes out. I know the administration gets a lot of questions and tries to be really responsive to it, but oftentimes it's, well, here's another document that we have, and here's another document. And I know people are really strapped, which is why, I mean, I always go back to kind of the nerdy answer of templates. And I know it just sounds so nerdy and I can't help it, but from what I've read and what I've studied, it is very difficult for people when they receive information in new formats to untangle first how it's being presented before they even start to access the information itself. And so I guess in general, I would encourage trying to figure out what are consistent templates we can use for financial reporting, for reporting out on metrics and against the goals of the strategic plan, and try to use them consistently, because I think it would help a broader range of people have less trouble barreling through and trying to struggle through understanding the format before even being able to access the information. So simplifying, I mean, what I've tried to do on PNF is just trying to simplify information as much as possible so that it can be more accessible to more people more quickly. Which is maybe easier said than done. Like, this is an outsider view looking in. Like, I know everyone's, there's definitely a best effort happening. But that's what I've taken away from my professional life more than anything, is consistency in communication, cadence, format, like that just creates. And I think anyone who gets in a new app and tries to learn it from out of nowhere, the simplest ones that follow patterns are a lot easier.
Thank you for that, Kate. And I do want to be mindful of the time. Sarah has graciously agreed to give up even an answer to Carrie's question about sustainability and electrified buses. Feel free to, but Kate, why don't we go right back to you?
Well, I know everyone's probably anxious to stop hearing us talk, and I think, thank you everyone for having us here. I am enjoying these conversations. I enjoyed Saturday morning getting a chance to talk to various candidates, and I know we're all here with best intent to continue the hard work for our students. I would love the opportunity to serve in this capacity and would appreciate any votes that you throw my way. But I also really respect all the other candidates in this race and the unique perspectives we all bring. So thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Julie, any closing thoughts?
I'll just say thank you for hosting this forum. It is so hard to reach groups of people and to share information. And I know how anxious voters are to learn more about the candidates and to understand who they're voting for. And sometimes that's very challenging in local elections. So I appreciate you hosting this forum and hosting it every week for different issues that are of importance to the Natick community. So I would ask for your vote on March 29th because I believe I bring experience, knowledge, and a positive and collaborative approach to the work of the school committee. I know this district has a vision for where it wants to go, and I want to be part of the solution, working hand in hand with our town partners and the community to make this vision a reality through proper funding, partnerships, and collaboration. And I did put my website in the chat, but it's a good reminder to vote next Tuesday, March 29th. It sneaks right up on you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, the month flew by. Henry, closing thoughts?
Okay. I'd like to read something to you. And this is off the document that the school committee puts out every spring. It's kind of a summary of here's how we did. On the front page, Natick Public Schools says, our promise. Now this is, pay real close attention to the words here, our promise. It isn't, we're going to try hard. This is our goal. This is our objective. No, it's this is our promise. Natick Public Schools will cherish your children, nurture relationships, and accept nothing less than graduates with the skills to lead the future they choose. Our superintendent and Natick Public Schools and the school committee are unique in Massachusetts because they have the courage to make that kind of a promise to their community. And I'd encourage everyone to think about that. I feel that I have a unique blend of experience and passion to help collaborate with my colleagues on the school committee and to help do everything we can to help the Natick Public Schools administration and the superintendent deliver on that promise. So please go see my website, henryfornatick.com, and I'd appreciate your vote on the 29th. And again, thank you very much, Martin and your team, for hosting this. I think this is extremely valuable, and thank you very much.
Great.
Oh,
Well, thank
great for joining us. Julie and I get to talk to each other enough, but I enjoyed learning more about you. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank all three of you for joining. And to Julie's comment, we do meet every week. We've always got interesting topics with, like, you know, obviously you're always welcome back as a community member for any of our future talks. Next week, we're going to be having Brian McPherson talk to us about Save Our Lake, the challenges of Lake Cochituate. And after that, we've got Ricky and Jay talking about Community Preservation Act. Frank, our Foss, our moderator, will be speaking to us on the 11th about town meeting warrant articles of interest. We'll take a week off for Patriots Day, and then at the end of April, we'll have Force Multiplier, which is an organization working on fundraising, strategic fundraising in battleground states to retain democratic control of both the House and Senate. So thank you all for joining, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you all. Goodbye.